Hello and welcome to episode 97 of Communicast, the podcast dedicated to enhancing communication skills. I'm your host, Scott D'Amico, president of Communispond. Today I'm joined by John Gallagher. John is the driving force behind Growing Champions Coaching and is a renowned consultant and coach to leaders at some of the world's most respected companies. In this episode, we explore the power of equanimity in communication and discuss how intentional feedback can transform performance. Whether you're managing a team, navigating change, or simply striving to communicate with greater purpose, this episode delivers actionable strategies and thought-provoking lessons. Let's dive in. John, thank you so much for joining me today.
Scott, it's great to be with you. Can't wait to see what we've got to chat about here and have a great conversation today. Hopefully add some value to your listeners.
That's what it's all about, having a great conversation and adding some value. Before we get too far into it, why don't you maybe just tell the listeners a little bit about your background, career journey, and the great work that you're doing today?
Sure. Be more than happy to do that. And I'll try not to take you back too far, but currently I'm the founder and CEO of Growing Champions. We are an executive coaching and performance consulting firm that works with small to mid-sized organizations and has worked with many large organizations as well, ultimately to inspire, encourage, and equip leaders to be successful at both work and life. And so we work with individuals, but we also work with organizations to implement process improvement that drives sustainable results through their organization. You know, the history that brought me here, I'm an engineer by trade, so systems and processes are very, we'll say, common to me in terms of theme. But when I think about what really led me into the role that I'm in today, starting out in manufacturing, I learned really fast that the true definition of engineer was not what I was all about, and that I was able to ultimately be more successful in what would be traditionally defined in that leadership role. And one of the things that made that very successful for me was my ability to connect and communicate with the individuals that were on the shop floor or in the office at all levels of the organization. And whether I learned that formally or just a skill that I was able to pick up through high school and college, it's something that worked out and it got me leadership roles probably a little earlier than I was ready for. I remember the first time I got a leadership role in my late 20s, being the plant manager for a facility that had about 200 employees, and I didn't know how to spell the word leadership. But ultimately, I knew that when the guy talked to me, he says, you just have the ability to connect with these individuals. Subsequently, worked my way up through manufacturing, ran a manufacturing company for about 6 years in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then ultimately moved our family back home in a decision that ultimately where we wanted to raise our kids. And I got into real estate, tried this thing out, rode that to the bottom in 2009 when things just fell out of the real estate market and it wasn't fun anymore. So I'm going to get back into operations again. And the communication I was having with the individuals that were in my network, they were telling me about consulting opportunities that were out there. I had been taught by Danaher executives, the Toyota production system, or lean as it's known. And they were saying, you really need to kind of dive into this consulting space. I said, I just really didn't want that life of the consultant, to travel and things like that. And when they called me back the third time and said, hey, why don't you try this out in hospitals and clinics, help us out in healthcare? I was actually naive enough to believe that, hey, I could do this for a little while and have an impact in that space. Well, that was 2010 when I joined this organization, and here I am today, 2025, 15 years later, still a consultant and executive coach in the last 5 on my own as an entrepreneur. So it just became part of who I was, and facilitation and communication skills were natural for me and ultimately something that I just really love to talk about on a regular basis. So here we are.
Fantastic. That's quite a journey. And when you were talking about you're doing a lot around process improvement, something went off. I'm like, all right, I bet there's an engineering background or some sort of manufacturing background in there. And I think a lot of people don't really think about that, especially when it comes to manufacturing, the critical role that effective communication plays in making sure that a factory, the lines, they're operating at the peak efficiency. And I know a lot of the work that I used to do at a prior job, we would work with manufacturers around leadership and developing some of those skills. And one of the big things we heard and we worked on some of our clients with was this idea of shift change and what like one shift leader of the line handing things
Mm,
off to the next shift leader. And
sure.
more often than not, there were miscommunications. They didn't know what was going on, what issues, something wrong with the machine, whatever it was. And as we worked with them to really enhance those handoffs and the communications there, they just saw the productivity dramatically improve, going back to effective communication. So really looking forward to our conversation today based on that.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it as well.
John, when you hear the term effective communication, or you hear that somebody is a very strong communicator, right? You were told early in your career, you have these communication skills, you're able to connect with people. So when you hear that somebody is a great communicator, what's the image that comes to mind for you?
Sure. I'd love to share it actually as a story in my journey that was real. And it goes back to around the time, and about 20 years ago, I was in a leadership role in a manufacturing company. Here we go again. And at the time, I was the acting president. I put that in air quotes. And for those who saw it, on video, but didn't see it on the audio, is that I had an opportunity to get my performance review done. And I remember when my boss came in, he said, I'm not going to give you the performance review as the acting president. I'm going to review you as you would be as the president of this division. And I'm like, here we go. This ought to be great. And, get a little bit of ego inside of me in terms of how things were going and starting to improve. We had a communication or performance review scale that went on a scale 1 to 5, 1 being you're not going to make it, to 5 being you're doing excellent and you're likely going to get promoted to the next role. And when that performance review was completed, there was a 2.3 as the final score. I'm like, whoa. And I was silenced in that performance review. But I know that what was really powerful in that performance review was there wasn't anything that this boss, this mentor who became a mentor of mine, had said that wasn't true. And he delivered in a way that also cared about me. And it's something that's really carried through with me as I've started my coaching organization. And frankly, really been close to me in communication recently in developing some material and blog posts. And that's that it takes both truth and grace when there's communication that's really effective. And I liken this just a little bit, it's kind of fun, to the performance of a great deep tissue massage. That having communication delivered with truth and grace ultimately feels like a deep tissue massage. It's difficult at the time, but it's also can be transformative if you take that and really use it well. Where something that's delivered like truth without grace, all you hear is truth, and they're delivering it in a rude way. That's like a beating that's painful and frankly very damaging. And sometimes people deliver communication with grace without truth. That's the Swedish massage. It kind of feels okay at the time, but you're not going to grow as a result of it. You're not going to grow in your leadership as a result. And whether, those types of communication skills, whether they're in the workplace, in a manufacturing space, or in some other leadership, or frankly at home, in community, or in your churches, communication with truth and grace is where the most powerful transformation can occur.
And speaking of great communication and effective communication, the ability to use stories and analogies and metaphors, hallmark of great communication. So I absolutely love the massage analogy there with truth and grace.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk a lot about when you're communicating, it's not just what you're saying, it is how you're saying it, how you look when you're saying it.
Absolutely.
And I think the intent behind why you're saying things, because sometimes giving tough feedback when you're doing it because you just want to beat somebody down, very much different than you're giving them that critical, hard, tough feedback because you care about them and you want this person to grow and to succeed. So I absolutely love that. Having to have the combination of truth and grace in your communications really does lead to that deep
Mm-hmm.
tissue massage. Fantastic. John, as you think about the skills that really are critical in the workplace today, right? As you're out there working with leaders, working with organizations, and I'm sure it's probably changed quite a bit over time, and even within the past 5 years has changed a good bit. But what are some of those key communication skills that really are mission critical for folks to excel at today?
Well, you talked about a little bit, you used the word intention. And I think intentionality in communication skills is so important. There's got to be a purpose inside of that. one of the things that I remember, again, another story that goes back to this intentionality. Early on in my leadership journey, I had an employee who was a difficult, let's just say a difficult employee. And it was at a situation early in my leadership role, I was ready to terminate this employee because it just was something they were difficult working with other people. And how do I give the feedback to this individual? They had been a peer of mine. I was promoted. I didn't want, as a new leader, I found myself saying, I want to be liked and I don't want people to be mad at me. That's another part of this journey. But the intentionality was there. And I attended a leadership retreat that was held. And I came back with a new tool called SBIA, Situation, Behavior, Impact, and Action. And so, along with that intentionality, I think we go into many tough conversations. And look, we're human beings. We're fearful of the response that we're going to get. Or we start down a path with our communication and we get deflected, we get distracted and start talking about something that we didn't even want to do. But this framework, SBIA, allows you to script that conversation to go into an intentional conversation with that individual to describe a situation. Like we were in a meeting yesterday and the specific behavior that you observed. You interrupted people 3 different times. And the impact that that had, both on you as an individual, as another person inside the room, maybe the group and what was going on inside the room, and frankly, on that individual who was being rude and interrupting others, the impact on them. And then the fourth being the action. So here's the action I want you to take as a result of that. And I came back and used that tool with that feedback with that individual to be able to go through it. And he's like, that's the best feedback I've ever received in my life. So here it was me not having a process, having a system to be able to give communication in an effective way that I wanted to deliver. I was ready to terminate this individual. I can tell you today that that individual has been with that same organization for over 30 years now and is a part of their executive team making a difference. And I don't know what would have been different if I hadn't learned to communicate in a much better way. I'm not saying that all those things work exactly like that when you're giving constructive feedback, but that's a story of the power of intentionality in your communication that can work, because that tool can be used for positive feedback as well, to let folks know how they're doing well and that you want them to keep doing those things.
And if you contrast that approach to what you just walked through, in the meeting yesterday, here's what I observed, here's the impact I have, here's what you do, versus the alternative you mentioned, you're just going to terminate the person. Or if I was just say, John, you got to stop interrupting people in meetings and then leave it at that, the likelihood that your behavior would change, I would say, would be relatively low or dramatically lower than the likelihood of behavior change when you take the approach that you laid out with the SBIA, because one, it is very intentional, it's very well thought out. And if I think of the intention behind the intentionality of it, right?
Absolutely.
One approach going to the SBIA is that I'm doing this because I want to see you get better. I want to see you improve. The other one, with just an offhanded comment, really doesn't show that I care. I didn't take the time to kind of fully think out how to address this situation. I'm just kind of putting it out there. I did what I did, so I can say I tried to address the problem. So the intention behind your message, I think, is very, very important.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. Again, timeliness is very important. You start to think about the other things that go along with that. You don't want to wait a month and give that feedback. Even SBIA will fail miserably. You're like, yeah, this was a month ago you did this. I'm like, why didn't you tell me then in terms of what was happening? So again, I think leaders, we again, as human beings, I think and this is a generalization, it's probably unfair, but we are conflict avoiders by nature. So having that structure, that framework that allows us to script it out, makes it easier. Not easy, but easier, no doubt.
It made me think of one of the recent guests on the show was talking about early on in his career. He was a young leader, got promoted very quickly. Most of the direct reports on his team were 10, 15, 20 years older than him. And he was very nervous about providing them any type of feedback or constructive criticism. And it got to the point of the annual review, and he starts to deliver the annual review. And the guy said, whoa, you've been riding with me on client meetings every 2 weeks for the past year, and now you're telling me this stuff? So absolutely, you have to be intentional and you have to be timely with it, because waiting 6 months down the road is not going to help. We talk a lot about this in our communications training programs when we're working with people on their public speaking skills, where
Hmm.
we're stopping that behavior right in its tracks the second we see it and course correcting versus waiting until they do a 10-minute presentation and trying to go back and, well, if you had done this differently, if you had done that differently, you should do this. Kind of stop the behavior as soon as realistically possible, depending on what it is. You provide the feedback, course correct, and then move forward. The likelihood of behavior change goes up exponentially.
Absolutely.
John, as you think about your career journey, your career success, if I were to ask someone close to you, a family member, friend, colleague, peer, what's kind of the key communication skill that has helped John get to where he is today? What might they share with me?
I love this as a question. I got to tell you, I struggled for the descriptor for a long time. And then I read a book just a few years ago that helped me out to like, that's the word that I've been looking for all these years. Equanimity is a skill. And I don't think anybody would use the word equanimity when they would tell me this, but ultimately it's calm in the midst of chaos, that I have the ability to remain calm. And I think that's very important from a communication standpoint to convey emotion without getting emotional in the conversation and allowing it to get out of hand. If someone else wants to raise their level of volume inside the meeting, that I can maintain a level of volume. And that's not always been the case for me. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I've got some tendencies inside of me to want to stand up and yell just as loud as somebody else, no doubt about it. And I can do that if the time, and I think there's a time and a place for that. But in most situations, it's being able to be calm and deliver something and ultimately in a voice that lets folks know that you're concerned, but also that you care about them. And that's the other side of it. It's one thing to be calm. It's another thing to know that when I'm done, I know you care about me as well. One of my favorite quotes from John Maxwell is nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that's one of those things that, as you build your level of leadership with individuals, they got to know you care first, and then they'll be able to accept that feedback from you as well.
Equanimity, was that the word?
Equanimity. Yeah, I didn't think it was a word
Equanimity.
either, but I looked it up. I actually found it in the dictionary. I'm like, he's just making that up.
Right.
There's
Yeah, I
no
haven't
way
got to that
that
on
that's
my
a real
my my
word.
word of the day calendar yet this year. So,
Right.
and it's interesting concept because as I think about leadership and communication and my experience, this idea of being able to remain calm in the midst of chaos is so important because as a leader, people are looking to you, whether you
Hmm.
are formally a leader within your organization or informally a leader within your organization. People are looking to you when things get tough. And if you're constantly blowing your gasket, you constantly just seem exasperated with everything and disheveled, or you are rushing out your communications, knee jerk responses to emails or to people asking questions, that just really pulls away from your credibility as a leader. So, this ability to stay calm in the midst of chaos is important. And for me, and I would say that's feedback, honestly, I've received throughout my career as well, is how do you, with all these things going on, how do you kind of keep that even keel about you? And it's a combination of things, but one of those is being intentional with slowing down and pausing.
Hmm.
When something comes across my desk, whether it's an email, a phone call, whatever it may be, we lose a deal, not just immediately responding. Sometimes it's getting just walking away from the desk, walking away from the message, revisiting it later, revisiting it the next day, not picking up the phone immediately to call somebody to see what's, sometimes just taking that breather really
Hmm.
helps you to recalibrate, put things into perspective, reread the message. Sometimes you get something where you read it the first time and you didn't read it correctly because you were rushing through it. So I think this idea of staying calm, being patient, taking pauses really does help.
I think you're right. And being an expert in communication, as you are, and listening through a couple of your episodes and getting ready for this, I'm sure that term you're defining, the verb that comes to mind for me is Abe Lincolning your email or your text message. The one of the things they used to talk about in terms of Abe Lincoln was that he would respond to some of his generals or some of his officers in his writing, and then he'd set that note on his desk for the night, and then he'd come back the next morning and read again, and ultimately he'd say, "Oh man, I'm glad I didn't
Hmm.
deliver that email," although he wasn't delivering by email, obviously, but I'm certainly glad I didn't deliver that message to the officer. I could say that a lot better. And we know that that enter button on the keyboard when you're sending that email, that is so dangerous when you click send because it's hard to get back. It really is hard to get back. And those words that are coming out of your mouth in a situation, again, whether it's with a coworker or frankly with your spouse or kids at home, you're like, I can't get that back. And it takes many times nine attaboys to make up for one, oh crap, in terms of some of those moments. You can lose trust real fast in those moments.
Absolutely. No, it's once it's out there, it's hard to get the proverbial toothpaste back into the tube, so to speak.
Hmm. Yes.
John, who's someone from throughout your career? You mentioned earlier, somebody that grew to become your mentor as they provided you some feedback, but who's someone from throughout your career that has had a big impact on your communication style? Maybe something that you've taken from them, adapted, made it your own, or just in general, right? They've had an influence on how you communicate.
Sure. I mean, I mentioned his name with an initial quote. The first book that I received as a leader was the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John Maxwell. And that was back in 1998, where that mentor of mine read through each chapter with me. And when I read through that book, I didn't know how to spell leadership. And we got started in terms of what that really meant. And when he walked through that chapter by chapter, it was just someone from a message standpoint, the simplicity of the words that he used and were very clear to me as he came through. And I started to follow some of his other things. I got into his monthly tape club, aging myself here in terms of getting started here, which turned over into a CD club. And now it's a podcast that he does. But I started to watch many of his videos on VHS as well and how he was delivering his message, and I just appreciated how he delivered it. He's a big guy as well, but he would sit down in a bar stool so that he could, in essence, get down on the level. And I'm not talking about the level with regards to hierarchy. I'm talking about the level of communication, being eye to eye with individuals. I love the process that he used with regards to fill in the blank with some of his themes. So they had handouts that went along with it, and I used that many times. And I just love the inspiring and encouraging way he delivers his message. So those of you watching the video can see that whole shelf up there is about 35 of John Maxwell's 100 books that he's written that I've read. But his message is simple, and it's just something that I've appreciated.
And I think I'm looking back. Yeah, I do. I've actually signed book from
Yeah.
him that one of my leaders had given to me. It's the five levels of leadership. That's the one.
Well, one of my favorites, one of the ones I
Yes.
use the most today. Absolutely. I mean,
Yep.
I could talk
Yes.
about five levels
Leadership.
of leadership for hours. Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. And it's funny when you mentioned the CD club brought me back to the old CD ordering CDs by mail. And it's funny, I
Yeah.
still get emails from Columbia House. They are still
Yeah.
in business. They are still, I think maybe they've moved on to DVDs now. I don't know what their
Mm.
model is, but they still are emailing me every day about
I
that.
love the 12 cassettes or nine
Yes,
CDs for a penny to get started out. Absolutely. Then you
exactly.
cancel your membership and start all over again. Yeah.
Exactly. John, as we're wrapping up here, what piece of closing advice would you have for folks listening to this, really just in general around the importance of developing the skills that we talked about today and the impact that it can have on both their work and their personal life?
Well, you use the word impact, and that would be the message that I would finish with today in terms of what's possible with regards to great communication and intentional communication. And that's what I often refer to as the greatest story ever told. Imagine, if you will, people that you know are sitting in a room and they're asked a question to write the names of five individuals who have had a positive impact on their life. The greatest story ever told is when your name ends up on one of those lists. You may never know it, but it's something that is the impact that you've had. And the only way that you create that impact is by being intentional at building relationships with those individuals. It's about being intentional on the frequency and the grace and truth that you use in your communication style. It's about being very intentional and making sure that you identify these are the individuals whose life I want to impact. and hope that they one day write your name on that list. So that's what I would leave them with, is that you don't know in your communication how that impact is going to have long term. And if you want to leave a legacy, then be intentional with your communication.
Very well said. I think the intentionality will lead to impact. And in just the short time that we've had together today, John, I am sure that your name has appeared on more than one person's list thus far, and I'm sure it'll appear on many more. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I really do appreciate you joining me. If folks want to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about you and your work, what's the best way for them to do that?
Best way to find me is on my website, coachjohngallagher.com. You can get access to my podcast as well, The Uncommon Leader. My weekly newsletter is The Champion's Brew, where I'm, inspiring and encouraging others, I hope, with some of the writing as well, and the writing style that I have, and then connecting with me on some of the social media buttons that are there too. So thank you for the opportunity, Scott, for being able to chat with you today, and keep doing what you're doing, because this is so important. Another one of John Maxwell's books I kind of think about as a theme: everyone communicates, but few connect. We got to get out there and connect, and you're making that possible with your podcast. So well done.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you so much. I'll be sure to put a link to the site in the show notes for those of you that are listening. John, thank you again. Really appreciate it. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.
Special thanks again to my guest, John Gallagher, for joining us and sharing those powerful communication insights around balance, intentionality, and the SBIA framework. As we wrap up, remember that mastering communication is a continuous journey. Make sure to stay connected with Communicast by subscribing so you can benefit from conversations with future guests. If you found value in today's episode, I'd be grateful for your support. Leaving a rating or review is a fantastic way to let us know the impact this show has had on you. Thanks, and have a great day.